You know what's strange? Most people who are financially stuck are not stuck because they don't want wealth. They want it deeply. They think about it constantly. They pray for it. They work for it. They watch videos about it. They read books about it. And yet, when wealth finally gets close, when the opportunity actually arrives, when the door actually opens, when the money actually starts to come in, something happens. Something internal. Something that has nothing to do with the economy or bad luck or God withholding. They reject it. Not consciously. Not with a deliberate decision to stay poor. But with 100 small choices that add up to one enormous pattern. They undercharge for their work. They talk themselves out of the investment. They trust the wrong person with the money they finally saved. They self-sabotage the relationship that would have opened the next door. They spend the windfall before it has a chance to become something. And then they look up, and the opportunity is gone. And they go back to wanting, back to praying, back to working, back to wondering why it never seems to arrive. Here is what King Solomon understood about this pattern, and what almost no one in our generation has been taught. The problem is never the absence of wealth. The problem is the rejection of wealth by a person who does not yet know they are doing it. Today we are going to look at exactly how this happens, the specific mechanisms by which people who genuinely want abundance keep pushing it away, where these mechanisms come from, why they are almost impossible to see from the inside, and what Solomon's wisdom reveals about how to finally stop. If you stay to the end, the last thing I share will explain why this pattern is not a weakness or a flaw. It is one of the most intelligent things your mind has ever done. And understanding that, truly understanding it, is the only way to change it. Let's start with what's actually happening beneath the surface. King Solomon was the wealthiest individual in the ancient world. At the height of his reign, his annual income in gold alone was estimated at 666 talents, a figure so staggering that historians still debate how to calculate its modern equivalent. He had more than anyone. And because he had more than anyone, he also observed something that people with less could not see as clearly. Wealth does not simply go to those who work for it. It goes to those who are prepared to receive it. And preparation is not primarily a financial condition. It is a psychological one. Solomon wrote in Proverbs 10:22, "The blessing of the Lord brings wealth, without painful toil for it." That verse is almost always read as a comfort, as permission to stop striving so hard. But Solomon was not writing permission slips. He was making an observation. And the observation is this: when a person is genuinely aligned in their thinking, their identity, their beliefs about what they deserve, wealth arrives with a quality of ease that surprised even him. And when a person is not aligned, no amount of toil will hold it, because the toil is not the problem. The receiver is. The first way people reject wealth is by undervaluing what they carry. There is a pattern Solomon documented repeatedly in Proverbs, described in different ways but always pointing to the same truth. The person who does not understand the value of what they possess will consistently trade it for less than it is worth. Proverbs 17:16 asks a piercing question. Why should a fool have money in hand to buy wisdom when he has no desire to learn? The verse is not just about fools. It is about the mismatch between what a person holds and what they believe it is worth. Think about this in practical terms. You have a skill, a real skill, something you have spent years developing, something that produces genuine value for the people who receive it, and you charge for it at a fraction of what it is worth, not because the market won't pay more, but because something inside you cannot bring itself to say the real number out loud, because saying the real number feels like a claim you haven't earned the right to make. Or you have an idea, a real idea, original, valuable, timely, and instead of moving on it, you spend months qualifying it, researching it, asking other people's opinions, waiting until you feel certain enough. And by the time you feel certain, someone else has already built it. Or you have a relationship, a mentor, a connection, a door that has genuinely opened. And you underinvest in it. You don't follow up. You don't show up fully prepared. You hold yourself back just enough to ensure that the relationship never becomes what it could have been. In every case, the mechanism is the same. You have something of real value, and your internal estimate of what you deserve to receive for it is lower than what the thing is actually worth. So you price low, move slow, and hold back, and then wonder why the wealth never accumulates. Solomon described the solution with startling directness. Proverbs 22:29 says, "Do you see someone skilled in their work? They will serve before kings. They will not serve before officials of low rank." The person who fully understands and fully commits to the value of their skill does not end up in small rooms. They end up in front of the people with the resources to truly compensate them. But that only happens when the person stops managing down their own worth. The second way people reject wealth is by keeping the people who carry it at a distance. This one is subtle enough that most people never see it, but Solomon saw it clearly. Proverbs 13:20 says, "Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm." The verse sounds like advice about character, but read it again through a financial lens. Walk with the wise and become wise. Your environment, the people you spend time with, the conversations you are regularly part of, the standards that feel normal to you, is shaping what you believe is possible, constantly, automatically, without your permission. Most people who are financially stuck are surrounded almost entirely by people who are also financially stuck. Not because they chose poorly, but because proximity to the familiar is comfortable, and proximity to something larger than what you have is deeply uncomfortable. It asks something of you. It shows you a gap. It makes demands on your identity. And so a very sophisticated thing happens. The person who genuinely wants wealth will often, in very subtle ways, avoid spending real time with people who have it. They'll find reasons why those people are different, or lucky, or corrupt. They'll stay in rooms where they are the most financially advanced, rather than entering rooms where they are the least. They'll protect the identity they have rather than risking it for the identity they want. And the result is a financial ceiling that feels external, but is entirely internal. Built not from any limitation in the world, but from a careful, unconscious management of who is allowed to get close. Solomon's prescription was not gentle. It was walk with the wise, not observe them from a distance, not admire them on a screen. Walk with them. Get close enough that their thinking becomes part of your atmosphere. The third way people reject wealth is by solving for safety instead of solving for growth. Proverbs 11:24 delivers one of the most counterintuitive financial observations in all of Scripture. One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. The person who holds everything tightly, who protects every resource, avoids every risk, guards against every possible loss, not because God punishes caution, but because the orientation toward protection rather than expansion produces a specific set of decisions that are incompatible with building. Think about how this plays out. The person who will not invest because they might lose. The person who will not start the business because it might fail. The person who will not take the higher paying opportunity because the current job is stable. The person who will not spend money on development, on education, on the tools that would actually produce a return, because spending feels like losing and not spending feels like safety. Every one of those decisions feels wise in the moment. Every one of them is, in the language Solomon used, withholding unduly. Holding back in a way that produces the very poverty it was designed to prevent. There is a version of caution that is wisdom, and there is a version of caution that is fear wearing the costume of wisdom. The difference is not in the behavior. The behavior looks identical from the outside. The difference is in what is driving it. Wisdom calculates risk and moves. Fear calculates risk and stops. And a life of stopping, regardless of how reasonable each individual stop feels, is a life that never builds. Solomon didn't call this weakness. He called it the path of the sluggard, not because the person is lazy, but because the outcome is the same as laziness. Proverbs 26:13 says the sluggard says there is a lion in the road, a fierce lion roaming the streets. There is always a reason not to move. There is always a lion somewhere. The person who waits for the road to be lion-free will wait forever, and the wealth that was available on that road will go to the person who walked it anyway. The fourth way people reject wealth is by spending before they build. Solomon returned to this theme more than almost any other in Proverbs. Proverbs 21:20 says the wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down. The image is stark. Two people receive the same resource. One stores it. One consumes it immediately. And over time, the gap between them becomes insurmountable, not because of any difference in income, but because of a difference in what they do with what arrives. For many people, the relationship with money is fundamentally consumptive. Money comes in and it goes out. Not always on extravagant things. Often on perfectly ordinary things. On small purchases that feel justified in the moment. On gifts and generosity and taking care of people. On the relief of spending after a period of scarcity. And at the end of every month, there is nothing left to build with. Again. This pattern is not about discipline in the way most financial teachers describe it. It is not primarily a behavior problem that can be solved with a budget. It is an identity problem. The person who believes, at the deepest level, that they are a person who struggles with money, will struggle with money. They will find a way to spend everything that comes in, because holding it feels wrong, because having savings feels unfamiliar, because the version of themselves who is accumulating wealth is a stranger, and the mind moves away from strangers. Proverbs 13:11 says wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. The mechanism Solomon described is not dramatic. It is not a single big win or a single big loss. It is the daily, unremarkable discipline of gathering little by little, and the daily, unremarkable discipline of not consuming what has been gathered. But that discipline is only available to the person who has already decided, at the identity level, that they are someone who builds. Not someone who struggles. Not someone who barely makes it. Someone who builds. The fifth way people reject wealth is by confusing activity with progress. There is something deeply comforting about being busy, about having a full schedule, about being able to point to your effort and say, I am working as hard as I can. It produces a feeling of virtue, of doing everything right. And it is one of the most effective ways there is to avoid the one question that actually matters. Is what I am doing building something? Solomon was direct about this in a way that still stings. Proverbs 14:23 says all hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. And Proverbs 21:5 says the plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty. The pattern Solomon identified was not between working and not working. It was between working with a plan that compounds over time and working in a way that produces income without ever producing wealth. You can work 60 hours a week for 30 years and have nothing to show for it except exhaustion. Not because you didn't work, because the work was never structured to build, because every week reset to zero, because the effort was real but the architecture was missing. The people who build wealth are not always the hardest workers. They are almost always the most intentional ones. They have decided, with clarity, what they are building toward, and every decision about where to spend time and energy is filtered through that question. Not is this making me money right now, but is this building the thing I am building? Most people have never answered that question. Most people are working very hard inside a structure that was designed by someone else, toward goals that were set by someone else, in a direction that was inherited rather than chosen. And the effort is real, and the exhaustion is real, and the paycheck is real, and the wealth never arrives. The sixth way people reject wealth is by waiting for permission. This is the one that is most painful to see, because the people caught in it are usually the most sincere, the most faithful, the most genuinely good. They are waiting for a sign, for a confirmation, for a clear word that this is the right time, the right move, the right door. They are waiting to feel certain, to feel ready, to feel that God has released them to act. And while they wait, the people who are less qualified, less faithful, and less careful are moving, and taking the opportunities, and building. Not because God loves them more, but because they decided that imperfect movement in a good direction is better than perfect stillness waiting for certainty that never fully comes. Solomon described the farmer who watches the wind and never plants. Ecclesiastes 11:4 says, whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. There is always a reason to wait. There is always an uncertainty that a more careful person could point to. And the person who needs all the conditions to be right before they begin will spend their entire life waiting for conditions that do not exist. Faith, real faith, the kind Solomon built his life on, is not the absence of uncertainty. It is movement in the presence of it. It is planting anyway, building anyway, pricing yourself correctly anyway, taking the meeting anyway, starting the thing anyway. The permission you are waiting for is not coming from outside. It is only ever going to come from inside. And the moment you stop waiting for it and start building as though it had already arrived, that is the moment things begin to change. The seventh rejection is the deepest one. It is the refusal to become someone new. Everything we have covered, the undervaluing, the distance from the wise, the solving for safety, the consuming before building, the activity without progress, the waiting for permission, all of it has a single root. And Solomon named that root in the most important financial verse he ever wrote. Proverbs 23:7, as a person thinks in their heart, so they are. Not as a person wishes, not as a person prays, not as a person intends. As a person thinks, in the deep interior, below the surface of conscious awareness, in the place where identity lives, so they become, and so they stay. The reason wealth keeps getting rejected is not a behavior problem. It is an identity problem. The person on the inside does not match the life that is trying to arrive on the outside. And whenever that mismatch becomes too large, whenever the incoming wealth threatens to make you someone you do not recognize as yourself, the system corrects. Quietly. Automatically. Effectively. The wealth goes away. The identity is preserved. And the person goes back to feeling like themselves. This is not a flaw. This is one of the most sophisticated functions of the human mind. The drive to remain consistent with your identity is so powerful that it will override intelligence, override effort, override even genuine desire. Because consistency feels like survival. And the mind does not easily give up what feels like survival. Solomon's entire framework of wisdom was, at its core, an identity project. He was not primarily teaching behaviors. He was teaching a way of seeing yourself, a way of thinking about what you are capable of, a way of understanding what kind of person you already are before the wealth arrives. Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. The heart Solomon was describing is not the organ. It is the deep interior, the place where self-concept lives, and his instruction was to guard it, to be intentional about what goes in, to actively reject the thoughts, the voices, the inherited beliefs that are programming it toward outcomes you do not want. Because everything flows from it. Every financial decision, every pricing choice, every moment of self-sabotage, every rejected opportunity, every relationship kept at a distance, everything. The work of becoming someone who can receive wealth is interior work first. It is the work of examining what you actually believe about yourself, not what you say you believe, not what you pray, but what you act as if is true, and then, deliberately, patiently, systematically replacing what is not serving you with something that will. What all of this points to is something that took Solomon a lifetime to fully understand. And that most people never understand at all. You are not poor because wealth hasn't found you. You are not stuck because the opportunity hasn't arrived. In most cases, the wealth has arrived. The opportunity has arrived. The door has opened. And something inside you, something that was built long before you had any say in it, by people who were doing their best with what they had, quietly turned it away. That is not a condemnation. It is a diagnosis, and a diagnosis is always good news. Because it means the problem has a location, and a problem with a location can be addressed. The good news, and Solomon's entire body of wisdom is, at its core, the best possible news, is that none of this is permanent. The identity that is rejecting wealth was not created by God. It was not written into your nature. It was formed by an environment and a set of experiences that you did not choose. And everything that was formed by experience can be reformed by new experience. New thinking, new input, new decisions made from a new understanding of who you are and what you are capable of receiving. The change does not begin with a better strategy or a bigger income or a different set of circumstances. It begins in the moment you look honestly at the pattern, at the specific ways you have been turning wealth away, and decide, with the kind of clarity that Solomon described as the beginning of wisdom, that you are done. Not done wanting, done rejecting. That decision, made quietly, made honestly, made in the interior where everything actually happens, is the beginning of everything. If something in this video landed for you, if you recognized your own pattern in what you just heard, do not keep it to yourself. Share this with someone you know who is working hard, praying faithfully, wanting deeply, and still watching wealth pass them by. Sometimes one idea, heard at the right moment, changes the entire direction of a life. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, we go deeper into the wisdom Solomon left for exactly this moment. And in the comments, tell me, which of these 7 rejections do you recognize most in yourself? Write the number. And write this with it. I stop rejecting what God is sending. I am ready to receive. See you in the next one.